Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. If this is the first time we are meeting, my name is Wenlin, and I'm a yoga educator and a private yoga specialist based in Turin, Italy. And today for this functional yoga and interoception session, I wanted to share with you a couple of different tips and also some guidance on how you may be able to move and also practice yoga or exercise a little bit more effectively from a place of true alignment and true safety. So let me elaborate a little bit more about how this session will work. So this will take about 30 minutes. And in the first part of the section, it will be more lecture style, and I'll be talking a little bit more about what interoception is, what functional yoga is, and why you should care about these two things if it's the first time that you've heard of them. And then later on, there'll be a hands-on or experiential session in which I'll guide you through a couple of different commonly practiced yoga poses or asanas, as we call them in Sanskrit. And then you'll be able to experience and feel different options for each one based on what feels best for you, so that based on what your unique skeletal variation, your anatomy, you might be able to then have these options available whenever you go to for example, a group yoga class, or if you're practicing at home, you know how to make these adjustments or modifications so that you can practice more safely and effectively. Okay, so how it goes is today I'll start talking about what functional yoga is. So if at any point of time, if you have any questions, please drop a comment in the comment box, and any ideas, any comments, feel free to let me know and I'll be able to answer them. Right, so let's pop into the discussion of functional yoga. So probably you're familiar with the practice of yoga, right? This is mainly a movement and also a breath practice that includes various forms of including meditation, including practice of poses that we call asana, right, in Sanskrit, as well as some breath practices that we call pranayama. Right, so you might already be familiar with yoga, but have you heard of functional yoga, right? And how this is different from, let's say, a normal yoga approach. So probably in a yoga class that you might have attended before, you might have heard an instructor, correct you or tell you, step your right foot out at this angle, or turn your body to face this direction, or have your leg turned out at a certain, let's say, 45-degree angle, right? Functional yoga, right, instead of looking at the alignment, which is how you should place your body or adjust your body in space from the outside, it looks at the purpose of a pose, the purpose of an exercise or movement. What are you trying to achieve? What is the underlying intention behind the movement? And it also then guides you to think about what you're trying to achieve. Let's say, so in my past few videos, I used the example of using weights, right? Let's say we use weights, and what we want to do is we want to build this muscle here that we call the bicep muscle. That's why we release and lengthen your arm, and then we contract. And when we contract, we're shortening the muscle, right? That is the function of this action or this pose. The same applies to every single movement or every single exercise or every single pose that you do, whether it is in yoga, in aerobics, in dance, in bar, in running, anything, right? It is the same. So functional yoga is looking at the alignment or the purpose of a pose, and then guiding each individual, right, to find a unique alignment that best suits you. So later on, I'll share in the comment box, but from anatomical studies, what we have found that there is a lot of variation in terms of our human anatomy. Right, this is not just between males and females, but also even within gender. And of course, there are some of us who may be cross-gender. For example, let's just talk about the length of the arm with respect, right, towards your torso. Some of us have slightly longer arms as compared to our torso. So for me, my arms are fairly average length, right? So they reach from my shoulders here and all the way and can touch down until below where my hip bones are. But some of us have shorter arms with respect to our torsos. right? And this is the same with respect to our legs as well, right? The length of our legs in the proportion of our upper appendages, our arms, versus our legs. These all affect, for example, how we are able to run, how we are able to do certain poses that, for example, require our palms to be on the ground, but then the legs to be extended outwards. Okay, so this is one such example. There's a lot of other skeletal variation. I'll show you another example with the elbows. So I'm Asian, right, obviously, right? And in yoga, right, very often, right, you will hear teachers say, don't hyperextend the elbows. And hyperextension is when, for example, you can see, right, you see my elbow is going beyond, right, that midline here, and it comes out like this. This is a normal skeletal variation. Right, I have no pain when I actually do this, right? This is like locking, so-called locking the elbow, and naturally my elbow, because of the torque or the angle, the spiral, right? The spiral of the forearm bone like this crossing over, right? It comes out like this, and it's natural, it's normal. But you will hear in some yoga classes instructors telling you don't hyperextend the elbow, right? Of course, their intentions are great, because when you hyperextend a joint, what happens is it makes it harder for you to engage the muscles that connect to that joint, right? So let's say I want to engage this muscle that attaches from here all the way towards my elbow. It's harder for me to draw that energy back in towards my shoulder blade, right? But what it means is that you should know, let's say for example for me, I have hyperextension in my elbows, right? And therefore, if my goal is to draw the energy from my palms, let's say I'm doing a pose using, there's weight bearing on the palms, I want to draw the energy back from the palms and use the energy in my shoulders, right? Then I will keep a soft bend in my elbows to draw the energy back, and that would be the purpose of the pose, or the purpose of that micro adjustment, right? This hyperextension by itself is not a problem because it's not causing me any pain, right? And when it's not weight bearing, for example, when I just hang out like this, I don't feel any pain at all in this position, right? And this is normal for me. It is normal. It may not be normal for you. You might not have this hyperextension in your elbows, and that's okay, because there's just so much variation in terms of our human anatomy. And I haven't even, I've just began to start talking about this. There's a lot of variation, right, in terms of our legs. For example, how wide we can externally rotate our legs. Right, I'll show you very quickly. So external rotation, you can come up and also try this if you would like, would be, okay, allow both feet to be roughly hip distance apart, and then start to turn out your leg towards one side. Notice how far you can go without moving your torso. Just your leg, only one leg. This is the external rotation in your leg. Right? When you start to feel like your hip is traveling towards with your leg, this means that the other parts of your body, the whole body chain is being involved, right? And some of us have more flexibility to externally rotate our legs a lot. Like you might see ballerinas or dancers, they can completely turn their feet outwards as such, right? Having a lot of external rotation, right? The knees are almost pointing outwards like this. But some of us may only be able to do this, and you already feel like, wow, that's too much for my femurs, right? My leg bones here inside the sockets, right? So all of these different specific small skeletal variations, right, in our bodies will affect how we experience and how we move, right? Every single movement, every single pose in yoga. Another point, right, before we go into the actual exercise, right, is that a long time ago, yoga as a practice originated from India, and initially most of the gurus, right, or the teachers of yoga were males, right? So they had male anatomy, and male anatomy is very different from female anatomy. For example, in general, we know that males have more narrow hips, right? And in general, we know that, for example, aside from that, for their pelvis or their pelvic bowl, right, it's a little bit more narrow, and it's not so wide. It's not so, it's more triangular, for example. So all these differences affect for example, the so-called universal alignment that might be taught during a yoga class that actually came from or originated from this practice of yoga or this discipline. But what we know now is that the people who are practicing yoga, there are so many different kinds of people. It might be female, you might be older, you might be younger. Most of yoga at the time that it originated, whether it's Ashtanga or for example Hatha yoga, was practiced by, okay, let's use the example of Ashtanga, right, which was created by Patabi Joyce, this guru who is very famous, right? At that time, he was training mostly very young boys, right, who had a certain anatomy. And young boys, if you begin practicing yoga, have a certain flexibility and your bones are more malleable because they haven't fully formed yet. And therefore, there's flexibility in the hip sockets, or there's more flexibility to bring your leg behind your hip, for example, without causing any injury. But let's say you or any of your students, if you're a teacher and you're tuning in, right, started the practice later on in your life. Let's say you were 25, or maybe even later, Vanda Scaravelli, or one of the most famous yoga teachers, she started her practice later on when she was in her late 40s and then began to teach in her 60s. All this would affect the nature of your practice and how you practice and how you experience all the poses. Okay, so I realize I'm running out of time. I have to just quickly hop on to the next point. If you have any questions about functional anatomy, about skeletal variation, I would highly recommend that you read a book, right, called Your Body, Your Yoga, that was written by Bernie Clark. Right, and I'll pop the link in the comment box later on, and that really gives you a lot of information on how there's no average, right? And average is just the sum of all of the different lengths of the arm bones, the external rotations or the degrees in our hips, and then you aggregate it. But no one actually is really the aggregate, because we are all unique. Our bodies are all unique. Some of us has one leg longer than the other. Some of us have one arm that is more flexible or able to externally rotate than the other, and therefore you can't really give so-called universal alignment tips, or that your right foot should intersect the arch of your left foot, so on and so forth, right? This might be difficult if you're telling people to do things or the pose based on what it looks like from the outside, and that is aesthetic yoga. Aesthetic yoga is to use your body to get into the pose so that you look in a certain way. Rather than doing that, I would encourage you, if there's one thing that you remember from this video, is to ask yourself when you do this pose, what am I feeling? What is the purpose of this pose? You know, am I stretching this muscle? Which muscle is being used? Which leg and which part of my body is feeling the tension, or feeling the relaxation, or feeling the contraction? So that brings me to my next point, which is called interoception. Right? Interoception is that your body's innate intelligence or ability to be able to sense and feel, right, different aspects. It could be things like pain. It could be things like, for example, muscle contraction or soreness. It could be things like, for example, a sharp tear of the ligament and things like this. And other things like the warmth, the temperature, many other things, physiological things that are felt from within. So even though there are some tips or there are some guidelines that may help you with your practice or whether it is yoga, whether it is running, any other form of movement, even though there are some guidelines as to how you may look on the outside when you're doing something, it's even more important to cultivate the sense of knowing what is the purpose of exactly that thing that you are doing. What is it trying to achieve? Is it stretching this muscle or strengthening this particular muscle or that particular bone, or are you compressing this part, so on and so forth, right? And now that you know, when you know the intention of the pose, then you can begin to understand, where am I supposed to feel it? Am I feeling it in the right place? If not, then maybe I should make some adjustment, right, to my leg or to my body, so that I actually get the intention of the pose. Because our body is so, how do I put it? It is really capable of many different things. And even, for example, in a specific yoga pose, right, you can change or make adjustments such as the function, so that the function of the pose is different. Okay, so now I've finished talking about functional yoga and interoception. If you have any questions, I've seen a few of you guys are tuning in. Please feel free to pop the comments or questions in the comment box so I'll be able to address them directly if you do have questions. If you're ready, please come join me and we'll start with a simple practice. This will be mostly standing, right? You want to make sure that you have sufficient space for you to move about and have ideally a non-slip surface. And if, for example, you have any pain in the knees, all right, standing is a little bit difficult for you, then be close to a wall or have a chair close by, and please practice safely. Okay, so we'll come towards the mat. And firstly, I want to talk about the most fundamental pose of all in yoga that most of the time it is the basis or the foundation of all poses, but hardly anyone talks about the alignment for it. It's called mountain pose or Tadasana, right? So we'll begin by just walking, bending your knees, walking on the spot. And just feeling when you do this, what you're doing is you're lifting one knee and you're contracting the muscle, right? Your hip flexor to draw your knee up and coming down. The same on the other side. See if you can feel that, right? A few more times like this, lifting and coming down, lifting, coming down. And then slowly set your feet down, right? And what you'll notice is naturally some of us will have our feet turned out. Some of us will have our feet turned in. Some of us will have feet parallel. And some of us will even have, for example, for me, I have one foot that's turned out very slightly to the left. My left foot is not exactly parallel, but my right foot is very parallel. So already there are differences in terms of your natural alignment for your anatomy. Right? And sometimes what happens in yoga is you might hear an instructor tell you, come into Tadasana with your feet together, big toes touching. Right? This is called abduction, which is when you bring your legs closer towards the midline. Right? Notice as you are doing this, your feet are narrower than your hips. Right, this is actually not possible for some of us to do. Depending on the width of your hips and how much you can bring your legs closer towards each other to the midline, it might feel very unstable for you. You might feel like you're rolling like this, right? And my idea, my guess as to why this is called the alignment for Tadasana traditionally is because probably in the past, right, most of the yogis or the yoga gurus who practice this, they are males and they have very narrow hips. I'm a female, you can see, right, clearly that my hips are wider than my waist, right? And therefore when I abduct my legs or bring them closer to the midline, it's pretty difficult for me. I have to keep pressing down, right, on my feet to make sure that I stay stable and I'm not like wobbling over from one side to the other. So already fundamentally, I would question, is this necessary? What is the purpose of bringing the legs together in this pose? Right? If mountain pose, for example, Tadasana, is meant to be a pose for you to feel strong, then might it not be better to keep your feet hip distance apart? Doesn't matter how wide, as long as the feet are underneath your hips, so that when they stack, right, your force or your weight can follow the line of gravity downwards and you will feel supported, right? This is more natural and follows the biomechanics of your body, right? First point, Tadasana. Do you need to bring your feet together? Is that possible? Or do you want to bring them apart? Just a point for you to consider. Always there are many options. The next point I want to talk about is the four corners of the feet, right? You might not be able to see this, but I have a very high arch here, right? You can see here. Right? What happens with people who have a high arch is that they might find it hard and the knees will naturally fall out this way. And if I'm doing a balancing pose, for example, a tree pose like this, right, what happens is naturally I might find myself falling outwards because of my high arch. Alright, this is why in my yoga classes, I usually cue my students to ground down through the four corners of their feet. So don't mind me, I'm going to come closer now and show you my feet to explain the 4 points of the feet. Okay, so this is very important. So the 4 points of the feet are here under the big toe mound, under the little toe mound, inside of the heel, and outside corner of the heel. Why do we have to press down through the 4 corners? Because they are the basis and the foundation for how you stand, how you walk, and how you root through to find that reverse, that rebound from the gravity. Right, so if you are like me and you have a high arch, you need to press down more on the big toe mound so that you don't collapse outside. If you are flat-footed or more towards being flat-footed, then you might find your knees collapsing inwards like this. And then you have to press more on the outside corners of your feet. Right, these are all things that may not be mentioned during a yoga class, or you might not know from whatever movement you are doing. So let's do this, okay? Bring your feet underneath where your hips are. Right, you can feel free to walk a couple of times and then land the feet wherever feels good for you. Lift all toes off the ground. Feel the 4 corners of your feet underneath. Soften through the knees, right? Just let your weight release down towards the 4 corners. Spread the toes. Ground down through the little toe, 4th toe, 3rd one, 2nd one, and then the big toe mound. And then from that rootedness, let your spine grow upwards, relaxing upwards. Right, this is the foundation for mountain pose. It doesn't really matter whether the feet are together or the feet are apart. Right, that same foundation, that same rootedness, rooting so that that energy will rise. And it's this unbroken sense of allowing all your joints, right, to be aligned so that you have the least amount of effort. In yoga, in the Yoga Sutras, they call it Sthira Sukha Asanam, which is finding stability and ease, effortless ease, right? Okay, so now we've explored Tadasana. Let's just explore a couple more different standing poses. I'll quickly check the time. Yep. Okay. Now let's begin to draw. So I'm mirroring you, right? So begin to step your left foot out towards the side and then turn your foot out. Okay, maybe your right side, whichever foot, so don't mind me. Right, now we're going to explore Warrior 2, right? Warrior 2 pose. And if you're not familiar with this, no worries, you can just follow me. Right, you have one leg in front which is externally rotated. Notice that what you did is you turn your foot out to do this pose. Not just that, but you move your legs away from each other. This is called abduction. When you do that, the muscles along the outsides of your legs are contracting, right? And the ones on the insides are lengthening and being stretched in order to spread open your legs, right? That's the primary thing that's happening. The next thing we're going to do, right, is to bend through the front knee. Okay, you can keep both palms on top of your hips, right? And we'll focus mainly on the legs now. Notice what happens when you bend through the front knee. What sensations are you feeling here? What is the purpose of this movement? Let's try this a couple of times again. Inhale, straighten. Okay, feel what's going on, so there's abduction. Exhale as you bend, notice what's happening. So there's something happening, right, in your front leg, right? In the top here, where your quadricep muscles are, and also in the outside, in your right glute muscles, right, at the back, your buttocks, and also along the right side body. So what's happening is all these muscles are being engaged to draw and to bend your knee forward so that your weight is shifting downwards closer towards the earth. And do you feel that when you do that, when you bend, what's happening is your back leg is stretching, and you might feel more here as well. So there's quite a lot going on here, right? And sometimes in a yoga class, for example, you might hear alignment cues that the heel should intersect the arch of the back foot, or maybe the heel should be in line with the heel. All this depends again on many factors. How wide you can spread the legs. Some of us have a lot of flexibility to go down all the way. Some of us have very tight hip flexors. And I have one client, for example, for her Warrior 2 is like this, and this is it. And she's feeling it so much here in the legs, right? And then another point I want to mention about is, this is abduction, so how far I can bring the leg out. For some of us, they cannot bring the leg out so much. I have another client, for example, For him, this amount, right, by moving the leg out this way, this is enough, right? And the heel is not really in line with the arch of the back foot, so supposedly, right? So does it really matter? What is the point of that cue, or what is the point of that pose, right? So I would hammer back to that point, and I would encourage you to cultivate the sense of when you do this movement, try to feel what is happening in your body, right? And then you can also play around and make adjustments, right? Let's say you had no problem with the alignment of heel intersecting the arch of the back foot. Try maybe heel to heel. How does that change the sensation in your hips, in your legs? Maybe you could turn the back foot out a little bit more. Maybe you could turn the back foot in a little bit more. And how does that change the orientation? Is there now a little bit of internal rotation in your back leg? You know, how does that feel? Does that feel right for you? And then you are always free to choose the option that actually best suits you once you know the function of the pose, and once you're able to cultivate that sensation that, oh, I feel this muscle contracting. I'm strengthening this muscle by staying in this pose, right? And then when I inhale, I press through the feet and I lengthen the front muscle. Now let's do the other side. We spent quite a lot of time here. Now turn the back foot in and then front foot out, right? So now we're on the other side, and we're going to do the same thing again on the other side. And you might notice there are differences. Inhale, straighten that front knee. So here I have this hip that's not that great. Sometimes I have clicking hip on this side, right? So I have to be super careful not to push myself too much. The same would apply to you. Do you have some small kinks here and there with your hip, with your legs that you should be aware of? That you shouldn't push yourself beyond your limits. And the same applies to your students if you're a movement professional, if you're a yoga instructor, right? So bring the palms towards the hips. Once again, traditionally, right, the cue is usually heel intersecting the arch of the back foot from the outside, right, the aesthetic yoga, right, or heel intersecting heel. Let's give it a shot, and then bend through the front knee, right, inhale, straighten, exhale, bend. Notice what is going on in your front leg. Inhale, straighten, exhale, bend, and then one last time, inhale, straighten, exhale, bend, and feel if this is the same on this side, or was it different, you know, compared to the other side? You know, what are the differences? Notice that this leg there's a little bit of internal rotation here in your back leg, and then this one is externally rotating, right? So there's a lot going on here. And again, on this side, you can feel free to adjust your foot. Try out different positions, right? Maybe you can't abduct or spread your legs so wide, and maybe this is okay. Right? Doesn't matter. I really think it doesn't matter. What's the purpose of the pose? Are you feeling the pose? Are you feeling the contraction in your front thigh, in the outside of your left glute muscles, which is your buttocks, right? Are you toning those muscles? If the answer is yes, then it doesn't really matter whether you look so-called perfect, or like, you know, whatever the yoga instructor or whoever is demonstrating that pose, or whatever is being shown on social media, right? Okay, let's see if there are any questions. Okay, so far no questions. Let's do a last pose, just for a quick one, and I wanted to see if you guys would have any questions. The next one I wanted to quickly run you through is called Trikonasana, or triangle pose, right? This one I really care about because in a lot of the classes when I guide students to do it, right, very often I see students coming down all the way, because the impression, right, for the pose is that, oh, I want to get my hand down towards the ground, right? Only advanced practitioners, or, you know, someone who is very experienced or very flexible will be able to get in towards the ground. Right? Let's have the same stance from before, right? Have your one foot facing the camera, more towards the camera, and then the other foot at a right angle, roughly, more or less, towards the other side, facing diagonally, right? And your body is more or less more towards the camera, right? There might be some differences, but it's okay. Your pelvis is anyway somewhere in between, because it can't face here, right? Anatomically, it's not possible, right? We're gonna bring the arms up to the height of your shoulder level, right? Feel everything strong through the core. Lift the four corners, or press down through the four corners of your feet, lift the toes. From here, you can begin to slide forward, and back. Notice what is happening. Forward and back. Once again, forward. Noticing which muscles are lengthening and contracting. Back. One last time, forward. Right, some teachers would teach, or some styles would teach Trikonasana this way, to slink forward and then begin to let the palm that comes below rest down or reach towards the earth or even grab the big toe. Right, important. What's happening here is when you're moving this way, your spine is actually crunching over. So if you're doing this and you're collapsing down all the way, what's happening is you're also moving into flexion because your belly is moving close towards the thighs. This pose, for example, my palm can touch down on the ground very easily, right? And this arm reaches up, is very different from, example, this pose where I reach and lengthen the spine and I lean back and I open my heart. Right, I'll show you I can very easily, fairly easily touch down on towards the ground because of the flexibility in external rotation for my hips. But do I feel spacious here? No, right? I feel a little bit collapsed here, in fact. And this is why even though I'm flexible, even though I can do it, and if I wanted to grab my big toe mount, I could, I don't do that. Not even me, if I'm an instructor, I don't even do that. I always tell my students to use a block. Just because it makes you feel a little bit more spacious, right? And it retains the external rotation, keeping the spaciousness in your spine while keeping your chest upright. So you feel that energy from the ground rooting through your spine up towards the sky so that you can lean back and then open your heart. Right? Okay, one more breath here, wherever you are. And then inhale, we'll rise up. Bring the block with you. If you have a block or 2 toilet rolls, it's the same. Now we'll come towards the other side. All right, you can place the block outside your left ankle. Okay, just take a breath here. Notice how you feel on this side. And then again, once again, we're gonna, by raising the palms at the height of the shoulder level, we might sling forward and back, forward and back, forward and back. Notice what is happening. Forward, 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 slinking, right? You might be sliding, you might feel that stretch in the underside of your front leg, and these muscles are also lengthening, feel that. And then let your left palm, let's do the wrong one first, okay? So let's say I want to collapse downwards all the way towards the ground. Notice that your spine is becoming rounded when you do this. And then when you look up towards the sky, maybe you're cranking your neck as well. Right, so is the point to get the palm towards the ground? No, but from the outside, right, aesthetic yoga, you might think, or your students might think, the goal is to get your hand down towards the ground. No, the goal, right, is to feel the external rotation in your front leg and keep the spaciousness and the brightness in your chest. Keep that length in your chest. This is why the block or whatever support here, or even just keeping your palms, keeping that length towards the sky might be more helpful for you, and we'll stay here for a few more breaths. One more breath. Press through your feet with the strength of your legs. Inhale, come up. And then slowly bend through one knee, the other knee. We'll set back up. Alright, okay, so we've come to the end of this short experiential session. Right, if you have any questions, please pop them in the comment box and I'll be glad to answer them. Right, so if there's interest, I will possibly do a specialized workshop explaining, for example, the functions of all specific different poses. Right, because usually in a class, right, if you don't have that knowledge of anatomy, or for example, you've never had an instructor who has that training in human anatomy and knows about skeletal variation and knows about, for example, internal rotation, external rotation, and variations and modifications, right, then you might have been practicing yoga based on what you see from the outside the whole time. Right, if there's one thing that you remember, right, I would like you to remember from today's session is that you are unique. Your body is unique, right? Depending on whatever sports you do or don't do, depending on whatever activities you engage in, what kind of work you do, this will all affect your human body, right? And some of it is inherited, right? Some of it is genetic, some of it came from, other activities that you did, your habitual preferences and stuff like this. So you are unique, right? So that's why it's important to begin to understand how you feel, and when you do a pose, begin to cultivate that connection with knowing which muscles and feeling which parts of your body are being engaged and in what kind of way, whether that's a good engagement or a bad engagement. So there's no time today for me to talk about that, and if you haven't watched the video, I have another video that's called 3 tips on how to have a safe home practice, and within that video I elaborate a little bit more about how you can begin to sense and feel the different kinds of sensations in your body, whether it is sharp piercing pain, which you should usually avoid, and whether it's a dull ache that's usually at the main part of the body of the muscle, which means that it's okay, right? You're contracting the muscle and you're strengthening the muscle, so that's very normal. The muscle is being loaded, and therefore it's going into fatigue, right? So if you haven't caught that yet, and you are not very sure about how to begin to approach to understand your body, then please have a look at that video. I have a huge library of videos here on Facebook, also on my Instagram. Yeah, and I hope today's video was useful for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the comment box. You can drop me a private message as well. I'll be happy to answer them, right? And I hope you have a great week ahead. Please take care and see you soon.